for much of the war in Ukraine, the dominant narrative has been one of slow, grinding stalemate. Russian forces advancing a few hundred meters after weeks of fighting, Ukrainian defenders holding fortified positions, and front lines that barely moved despite enormous casualties on both sides. Maps change slowly. Headlines talk about attrition, trench warfare, and endless artillery duels. But over the past year, something significant has been happening beneath that surface narrative. Ukraine's counterattacks have begun to reshape the battlefield in ways that Moscow did not expect, and in several key sectors, Russia's once steady frontline pressure is beginning to fracture. To understand why these counterattacks matter so much, it's important to remember how Russia has been fighting this war since the failure of its initial invasion in February 2022. After the rapid assault on Kyiv collapsed, the Kremlin shifted to a much slower strategy. Instead of trying to capture Ukraine quickly, Russia adopted a war of attrition. The logic was simple. Russia had more soldiers, larger ammunition reserves, and a defense industry capable of producing huge quantities of artillery shells and military equipment. If Moscow could keep the war going long enough, eventually Ukraine would run out of manpower, weapons, or Western support. For a time, that strategy seemed to produce limited results. Throughout 2024 and early 2025, Russian forces slowly pushed forward in eastern Ukraine, particularly in parts of the Donetsk region. Towns and villages changed hands after months of brutal fighting. Places like Avdiivka and other frontline settlements were eventually captured after being reduced almost entirely to rubble. These advances were small on a strategic map, but they allowed the Kremlin to claim that its long-term strategy was working. But attrition warfare only works if the side applying pressure can sustain the enormous cost involved. And by late 2025 and early 2026, it became clear that Russia was paying a far higher price for those incremental gains than many analysts originally expected. Western intelligence estimates suggest that Russian military casualties since the invasion began have climbed well above several 100,000, including both killed and wounded. Equipment losses have also been staggering, with thousands of tanks, armored vehicles, and artillery systems destroyed or abandoned across the battlefield. Ukraine's recent counterattacks have been designed specifically to exploit those growing weaknesses. Instead of launching a single massive offensive along the entire front, Ukrainian commanders have adopted a more flexible approach. They focus on identifying sectors where Russian units are overstretched, poorly supplied, or exhausted after months of offensive operations. Once those weak points are identified through drone reconnaissance, satellite imagery, and battlefield intelligence, Ukrainian forces move quickly to strike. These attacks are often carried out by relatively small assault groups, supported by drones and precision artillery. The objective is not simply to charge Russian defenses head-on, but to disrupt the systems that keep those defenses functioning. Ukrainian drones hunt for ammunition depots, command posts, and supply convoys. Long-range missile strikes target rail hubs and fuel storage facilities far behind the front lines. When those logistical nodes are destroyed, the effects are felt almost immediately by Russian units in frontline trenches. Artillery batteries suddenly find themselves running low on shells. Armored vehicles cannot move because fuel deliveries are delayed. Replacement troops arrive late or not at all. In modern warfare, logistics is often more important than raw manpower, and Ukraine is increasingly focused on attacking that vulnerable backbone of Russia's war effort. Once Russian positions begin to weaken under that pressure, Ukrainian ground forces exploit the situation quickly. Small mechanized units push forward to capture trenches and defensive positions before Russian commanders can organize an effective response. In some areas, Ukrainian forces have managed to push Russian troops back several kilometers in just a few days of fighting. Compared to the slow meter-by-meter progress that has defined much of the war, those breakthroughs represent a dramatic shift in momentum. One reason these counterattacks have been effective is the growing role of drones on the battlefield. Both sides rely heavily on unmanned aerial vehicles for reconnaissance and strikes, but Ukraine has increasingly used drones to maintain constant surveillance over Russian positions. This creates a battlefield environment where Russian soldiers often feel like they are being watched at all times. Supply trucks moving toward the front are frequently detected and destroyed before reaching their destinations. The psychological impact of that constant surveillance should not be underestimated. Soldiers operating under the threat of drone strikes must move cautiously. often limiting their ability to reinforce vulnerable positions. Commanders must assume that any large movement of vehicles or troops could quickly become a target. Over time, this erodes the stability of defensive lines that depend on steady resupply and coordination. Another factor contributing to Ukraine's recent success is the improvement of its command and control systems. Since 2022, Ukraine's military has integrated a wide range of Western technologies, including advanced communications equipment and intelligence-sharing networks. These systems allow Ukrainian commanders to coordinate artillery, drones, and ground forces far more effectively than during the early stages of the war. This advantage in battlefield awareness allows Ukraine to fight with greater precision. Instead of wasting ammunition on broad bombardments, Ukrainian forces can concentrate firepower exactly where it is needed. When a Russian position shows signs of weakness, Ukrainian units can respond almost immediately. Russia still possesses major advantages in certain areas, particularly in artillery production and manpower reserves. Russian factories have dramatically increased the output of artillery shells and rockets, producing millions of rounds each year. Moscow has also drawn heavily on its large population to replenish frontline units through mobilization and recruitment campaigns. However, those advantages do not automatically translate into battlefield dominance. If supplies cannot reach the front quickly enough, or if units are poorly coordinated, even a large army can struggle to maintain defensive positions. In several sectors of the East